Hartwell fine furnishings smelled like cedar oil and old brass, the kind of smell that made people slow down without knowing why. Nora Callum ran her hand along the edge of a reclaimed elm sideboard, checking where the dovetail met the drawer face. Beside her, Fletcher Vane crouched at the base, pressing a thumb against the joint where the leg was mortised into the rail. He had sawdust on the knee of his dark jeans, and a small folding rule in his back pocket that he had not once used. The shop owner, an older man named Raymond, with paint-flecked reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, came back from the stockroom with a receipt book and looked at them the way people look at couples who move through a space in easy tandem. "Your husband has a good eye," he said. "That's original joinery. 1940s, maybe earlier. They don't cut wood like that anymore." Nora opened her mouth. Fletcher answered first, his voice easy. "She has the eye. I'm just here to carry things." Raymond laughed. "The best kind of husband." Fletcher laughed too. Nora looked down at her hands on the sideboard. Her fingers had gone still without her deciding to make them still. She said, almost to herself, almost to the grain of the wood, "I wish that part were true." Raymond stopped laughing. Fletcher's hand went flat against the rail. The drive back to Lunenburg took 40 minutes along the south shore, the road running close to the water and then pulling away from it. The fog had come in from the Atlantic and sat low over the fields. Fletcher drove with two hands on the wheel, which was not how he usually drove. He let 10 minutes go before he said anything. "Hey," his voice was the same as always, level and unhurried. "You doing all right over there?" Nora had her face turned toward the window. "Don't," she said. "Don't call me that if the whole thing is a joke to you." His hands tightened on the wheel. The fog thickened over the road ahead and then thinned again. He did not say another word the rest of the way. She had come to Lunenburg in February, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. She had been the chief operating officer of a mid-sized hospitality group in Halifax, the kind of job that filled a calendar 18 months out and left no room for anything else, including noticing when a marriage had gone quiet. Thomas had not yelled. Thomas had not fought. He had sat across from her at the kitchen island one evening in June and told her, in the same voice he used on conference calls, that he thought they had become two people who lived efficiently in the same space and called it a life. She had not argued. That was the part that stayed with her. She had bought the Lunenburg property on impulse, which was not a thing she ever did. A 3-story wooden house on a narrow, uphill street, built in 1887, painted the color of a bruised plum, with a deep covered porch and a dormer window that faced the harbor. The inspection had flagged 17 items. She had made an offer the same afternoon. Her friend Judith, who had grown up in Lunenburg and now ran the visitors bureau, had given her one name for the work: Fletcher Vane. "He'd done the Mecklenburg Inn restoration 3 years back," Judith said. "He's the only one I'd trust with an old house on this street." That was how Nora had come to know his name. In 3 months of working together, they had built the particular rhythm of two people who are careful with each other. He arrived before 8 and did not take the first coffee of the morning until she offered it. She remembered without asking. That he took it, black in winter and with a small pour of milk when the weather turned. He brought his daughter to the site on Wednesdays and Fridays, and the girl, Wren, who was 6 and precise about everything, had taken to sitting on the porch step and drawing the houses across the street in a small, yellow notebook while her father worked. Wren's mother had died 3 years ago. Fletcher had told Nora this once in passing, the way people mention facts they have made their peace with. Nora had not pressed. She had only nodded and looked back at the window frame they had been discussing, and he had seemed grateful for that. Today had been the first time they had stood anywhere together that wasn't her house or a salvage yard. When she got inside, Nora set her jacket over the back of a kitchen chair and stood at the counter for a while without doing anything. She picked up her phone. She set it face down. She picked it up. The screen stayed dark in her hand, and she held it the way a person holds something they haven't decided what to do with yet. Outside, the fog was coming up from the waterfront, and the old street lamps were starting to glow amber in the gray afternoon. She did not type anything. She just held it. 4 days passed, without a single message between them. Fletcher started the porch rail restoration on Monday. The original balusters were white pine, several of them soft with age where the paint cracked and let the water in. He had milled replacements from clear pine stock at the shop behind his bungalow on Pelham Street, matching the profile on the router table by hand until the spacing was exact. The work let him stop thinking for long stretches at a time, which was what he needed. Nora was not there. She had 3 back-to-back client calls Monday morning, a site visit in Mahone Bay, a board presentation she had rescheduled twice. By Tuesday, her assistant in Halifax had stopped remarking on how compressed the week had become. Wren came to the site after school on Wednesday, the way she always did. She set her backpack against the sawhorse, took her yellow notebook from the front pocket and went directly to the porch step as if resuming something she had left there. She drew for a while in silence. Then she looked up at her father. "Daddy." She held the notebook out. "What house is this one?" Fletcher came over and crouched beside her. She had drawn the house across the street, a red and white Georgian with a black door. But she had added a small figure in one of the upstairs windows, barely a shape. "That's Mrs. Oldershaw," he said. "She has a cat named Jeffrey." Wren nodded as though this was information she had already suspected. She turned back to the page and added what might have been a cat in the window beside the figure. He let her keep drawing and went back to the rail. Judith Carmichael came up the porch steps at 3:30. She had a manila envelope under her arm and the expression of a person who has decided to do something and has decided not to be talked out of it. She set the envelope on the porch railing. "I've been keeping this for 18 months, she said. "I think it's time you had it." He waited until Wren had wandered through the front door to investigate the new baseboards in the sitting room before he opened it. Inside, a copy of a letter on legal firm letterhead from a Toronto estate, a property deed registered to a numbered company, and a hand-taped note on plain white paper in handwriting he recognized as his father's, though he had not seen it in 14 years. "Fletcher, I am not asking you to explain yourself. I am asking you to know what is yours before it passes to people who will use it poorly. What I built for you. I know that does not make up for anything. It is simply true. Dad." The estate was Vane River Holdings. 1,400 acres of managed forest in northern New Brunswick, a sawmill outside Campbellton, and a wholesale timber operation that supplied a third of the Atlantic province's custom millwork market. His father had died 11 months ago. The letter had been mailed to a Halifax address Fletcher had not lived at in 4 years and had sat in a dead letter file until the estate lawyers had tracked it to Judith, who was listed on an old emergency contact form from the years when Fletcher had been doing a lot of traveling and needed someone reliable to hold things. "I walked away from all of it when Claire died," he said. His voice was steady. "I'm not going back for the money." "I know," Judith said. "That isn't why I gave it to you." He folded the envelope closed and took it to the truck. He put it in the glove box and drove home without opening it again. Across the harbor, in the small converted office she kept above the bookshop on King Street, Nora was in a meeting that had not been on her calendar that morning. His name was Philip Strath. He was 41 years old, wore a wool blazer the color of deep water, and carried a leather case that made no sound when he set it on the table. He had walked in at 11:30, given his card to the woman at the front desk of her building, and said he had 15 minutes of something she would want to hear. Nora had looked at her calendar. She had looked at the harbor through the window. She had said to send him up. He sat without being asked, opened the case with a quiet efficiency that told her he had done this before, and got immediately to the point. He had read the Chronicle Herald piece about her divorce settlement in the spring. He had read the Lunenburg Heritage Register application she had filed for the house on Montague Street. He understood she was a woman who knew the difference between an investment and a home. Nora did not move. "I'm not here to sell you anything today," Philip said. "I have one question, and if you don't like it, I'll leave." He waited. She waited. "Why did you choose the oldest house on the most impractical street in Lunenburg, at exactly the moment when you could have bought anything you wanted, anywhere you wanted?" The room went very still. She did not answer him. She did not need to. He turned the leather case toward her. The photographs were of a property outside Chester, 32 acres, backing onto a freshwater lake, a main house built in the shingle style with old-growth fir throughout, a boathouse, a guest cottage, 200 feet of private shoreline. He spoke about it the way people speak about things they believe the other person will eventually want. "Off-market," he said. "Never going to MLS. Private seller. A good faith deposit of $200,000. Fully refundable under the terms of the addendum. Would lock it for 60 days while she did her due diligence." He did not push her to decide. "Come see it Saturday," he said. "Walk away after the walkthrough if you want. I won't follow up." She looked at the photographs for a long time. "Saturday," she said. He left without another word. He placed the leather case on her desk for her to look through at her own speed. In the second week, Nora came back to the Montague house at 6 in the evening on a Tuesday and found Fletcher in the front hallway installing the brass stair rods that had been on back order since March. Wren was cross-legged on the bottom stair with a piece of cardstock and a set of pencil crayons, drawing something Nora could not see the front of. They both looked up when she came in. "Fletcher." She said his name the way she had been thinking it for 4 days, plainly without decoration. "I owe you an apology." "You don't." He didn't stop what he was doing. "I treated you differently for 4 days, because you startled me. That was unfair." He set the screwdriver down then and turned around. The hallway light was behind him, and it softened the lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked at her steadily. "Nora, you said a true thing. I'm the one who didn't know what to do with it." She did not answer. She nodded once. Wren looked up from the cardstock. She held it out toward Nora. "I drew the house," she said. "You can keep it." Nora looked at the drawing. The plum-colored house on the narrow street, the dormer, the covered porch, a figure in the front window. Wren had given the figure long hair. Nora took it carefully with both hands. The Chester property was every bit as beautiful as the photographs had made it look. The light hit the lake at 3 in the afternoon the way Philip had predicted it would. The fir floors in the main house were the old-growth kind you almost never found anymore, close-grained and hard underfoot, the color of honey left in a warm place. He walked her through it slowly and spoke about everything in the measured tones of someone who has learned that silence unnerves buyers and so fills it carefully. He spoke about the boathouse structure, the geothermal heating, the closing timeline that would have her in by Thanksgiving. He spoke about the wire transfer details. He mentioned the Charlotte firm, handling the private financing once, and then let it sit. "I need a few days to think," Nora said. "Of course," said Philip. "Take the week. I'm not going anywhere." That evening, the Lunenburg Heritage Society newsletter posted an item online. It was not a newsletter item. It was framed like one, but it read like gossip, written to sound like news. The headline, "Halifax Executives South Shore Renovation, a Personal Project." The photographs had been taken through the front window of her house on Montague Street. In one, Nora's hand on the elm sideboard she had moved into the front sitting room last week. In another, Fletcher on his knees setting a threshold plate, sawdust across the back of his canvas jacket. The piece described the renovation with a certain warmth in its voice. The kind of warmth that is actually cold. It noted the contractor's name. It noted his circumstances in a single sentence that managed to say widower and young daughter in a way that was meant to sound sympathetic but wasn't. Fletcher was eating lunch on the tailgate of his truck on a Thursday when his friend Knox texted him the link. He read it once. He put the phone face down on the steel. He pressed both palms flat on the truck bed and breathed in slowly through his nose for a count of 4. He did not call Nora. Nora saw it when she got back to the King Street office at 7 that evening. She sat at her desk for a while after she read it. Then she closed the laptop and drove to Montague Street. Fletcher was sitting on the top step of the porch. His jacket was folded over his knee. The porch light was not on. "I don't know who gave them those photographs," she said. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I do." He held out his phone. He had 4 browser tabs open. The first was the Heritage newsletter piece. The second was a similar item from a Mahone Bay community blog in January, framed almost word for word the same way, about a woman who had recently sold her share in a family business and was renovating a property on Edgewater Drive. 6 weeks after that piece ran, the woman had signed an off-market purchase agreement with a private investor whose name was not on any public record. The third was a piece from the previous autumn about a widow in Wolfville who had wired funds to a holding company registered in Ontario. The fourth was a company registry search. The holding company in the Wolfville case and the Charlotte firm Philip had mentioned in passing shared a registered agent. Nora read the second piece carefully. "Then the third," she said. "Philip." "Probably. Don't sign anything until I know more." She did not ask him why he had been looking. She simply nodded. He moved to the side of the step, and she sat down a careful distance to his right. Across the narrow street, Judith Carmichael's porch light came on. Judith stood at her window with a mug and did not come out. The old street lamps came up along the hill. Nora's hand was on the wooden step between them. Fletcher's hand was on his knee. Neither of them moved. Nora's board met the following Wednesday morning in the small conference room at the Halifax office. 6 chairs, coffee poured. Her chief financial officer, a man named Gerald Poulin, who had joined the company 3 years ago from a Calgary firm and had not yet learned to read the room, set a printout of the Heritage newsletter item face up on the table before the meeting started. He said he thought it would be prudent to discuss optics. The oldest member of the board, a woman named Patricia Harrow, who had been Nora's mother's closest friend and had sat on this board since its founding, looked at Gerald Poulin in the particular way she reserved for things that did not deserve a full sentence. "I have been in this room for 16 years, Patricia said. No one asked for an optics discussion when Nora's marriage ended. No one asked for one when she negotiated the Halifax portfolio refinancing a loan in January. No one asked for one when she chose to work remotely from Lunenburg for a season. We are being asked to have this conversation because of an anonymous neighborhood newsletter. That is not governance. That is something else." The room held still. The item did not make it onto the agenda. Gerald folded his printout in half. He did not unfold it again during the meeting. Saturday morning at the Lunenburg Farmers Market. The stalls ran along the waterfront, and the air smelled like fresh bread and salt, and the particular cold clean of a Nova Scotia October morning. Fletcher had Wren by the hand. They were at a table buying dried chanterelles from a man with a long gray beard when Nora came up from the direction of the ferry terminal with a paper coffee cup and no particular plan. She had not texted. She had simply walked over. They moved along the stalls. Wren ran ahead toward a table stacked with small pottery pieces, handled mugs, and squared bowls in a gray-blue glaze. "I'm meeting Philip Monday afternoon," Nora said, "to sign the deposit forms. You asked me to wait. I waited." Fletcher stopped between 2 tables. "Give me 2 days," he said. "Why?" she said. 2 days. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was a name she didn't recognize. He said, "I have to take this," and stepped 3 paces off toward the water. He listened more than he spoke. He said thank you once. He came back and his face was not the same as when he had left. He did not explain what the call had been. He said only, 2 days, Nora. Don't sign anything, please." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. Wren came running back with a small gray-blue mug in both hands. "For you." she said, and held it out to Nora with the particular solemnity of a 6-year-old presenting something that matters. Her hands were warm and certain. Nora took the mug. For a second, Wren's palm rested against Nora's fingers before she let go. Fletcher watched the exchange, and Claire crossed his mind the way she sometimes did, briefly, like light moving across a floor. Then she was gone, and they kept walking. Knox Okafor drove up from Dartmouth on Friday. He and Fletcher had met during a 4-year stint doing remote construction projects in the territories, the kind of work that either built a friendship or ended it, and had remained close in the decades since. Knox now ran a small financial investigations practice out of his home office. He carried a black folder and the quiet, alert posture remembered from a lot of difficult situations. They met at Fletcher's workshop, behind the Pelham Street bungalow. Wren was at Judith's. A woman named Sandra Rowe, who had been a licensed real estate agent in Lunenburg County for 19 years, met them there at 4. The Chester property has been active on MLS for 81 days, Sandra said. It currently has 2 offers pending. It has never been part of any private financing arrangement. I do not know a Philip Strath. She set a printed listing sheet on the workbench. She did not sit. She had been watching something like this gather for 2 years. In the local market, she said. And none of it had ever been clean enough to take to the provincial regulator. Not yet. Knox opened the second folder. A fraud investigation had been open at the RCMP's Commercial Crime Unit in Halifax since the previous spring. 2 women in the Annapolis Valley had each lost between $50,000 and $70,000 to a holding company registered in Ontario that traced, after considerable paperwork, to Philip Strath as its sole beneficial owner. The investigation had reached the stage where a charge approval request had been submitted to the Crown. Knox had a contact on the file who was prepared to receive new and corroborating information. Sandra gathered her things before she left. She looked at Fletcher directly and said, "Get your friend out before she signs. He is patient, and he is convincing, and that is what makes him dangerous." That night, after Knox had driven back south, Judith came across the street and asked Fletcher to come sit on her porch for a while. She had a thermos of tea. She also had a shoebox on the wicker table that she had not opened in 7 years. "This was in your father's things," she said. "He dropped it here when you were living up in Yellowknife. He said you might want it someday, and I said I'd hold it." She opened the box. Inside, a photograph, old enough that its edges had softened. A July afternoon in front of a low stone building, with the words, "Department of Natural Resources," carved into the lintel above the door. 2 women, late 20s, in canvas work shirts, arms around each other's shoulders, and laughing at something that had happened just before the shutter. "The woman on the left is your mother," Judith said. "Margaret Vane. The woman on the right is Vivienne Callum, Nora's mother." Fletcher did not speak. They were in the same resource management cohort at Dalhousie in 1991. Your mother was writing her thesis on sustainable coastal forest management. Vivian was doing applied research on heritage restoration economics. They were planning to develop a pilot project together in New Brunswick, working with your grandfather's timber holdings in the north. When your mother married into the family and your grandfather wouldn't release the land rights, the project collapsed. Your mother died the following year when you were 4 months old. Vivian carried her research forward. That work became the foundation for the methodology Callum Heritage Partners has been using for the past 15 years. Judith closed the shoebox. "I am not saying this is fate," she said. "I am saying these were 2 women who once meant to build something together, a thread that broke 30 years ago. You and Nora are not obliged to pick it up. I am telling you because you should know." Fletcher drove home in the dark. He sat in the workshop for a long time, with the manila envelope from the glove box open on the bench. He read his father's letter again, couched. At the end of the typed page there was a handwritten addendum he had not read the first time, a single sentence. The management rights to the Campbellton operation were to be held in trust for Vivienne Callum's heir, in whatever manner she would have wanted that to be understood. The heir named in the document was Nora Callum. He sat there for a long time, without moving. Sunday evening came down pale gold over the Lunenburg rooftops, the kind of late October light that makes everything look like it is being preserved. Philip Strath parked on Montague Street at 6:30. He had a document folder on the passenger seat and a practiced ease in his shoulders as he came up the porch steps. Nora opened the door. She had set the dining table with the lamp on and 2 pens beside the chair she had pulled out for him. Her hands were steady. She had not seen Fletcher since Friday morning. Philip sat. He talked about the closing schedule in the agreeable way he had, unhurried, reasonable, as though this were a conversation between 2 people who had already decided. He uncapped his own pen and slid the deposit instruction sheet across the table toward her. The knock at the door came 90 seconds later. Philip looked up. He looked at Nora. He went to the door himself and opened it. Fletcher stepped past him into the front room. He carried a slim folder under his arm. He walked to the dining table and set 3 things down on the wood, one after the other. First, a signed statement on Sandra Rowe's letterhead. The Chester property had been listed on MLS for 81 days, had 2 pending offers, and had never been part of any private financing arrangement. Sandra Rowe did not know Philip Strath. Second, a redacted summary, cleared for sharing by Knox's contact at the Commercial Crime Unit, of an active RCMP investigation into Philip Strath under his Ontario holding company for fraud losses, totaling approximately $120,000 from 2 women in the Annapolis Valley. Third, a small digital recorder. Fletcher pressed play. Knox's voice, level and without inflection, described 2 phone conversations with 2 women in the Lunenburg area whom Philip had approached in the past month. Same language, same deposit figure, same property used as bait, same timeline. Crouched, Philip held his composure for the first 30 seconds. He shifted his weight at the federal summary. By the time the recorder stopped, the smile had contracted to something thin and effortful. "Nora," he said, and his voice was still warm. "This is what happens when someone feels displaced. He is a tradesman reacting to something that isn't his business." Nora did not look up from the table. When she spoke, her voice was almost quiet enough to miss. "Never mentioned Fletcher's name to you. How did you know about the photographs?" The room had a shape after that, a held breath shape, and the shape lasted for several seconds. Philip turned to Fletcher. His mouth moved with something that wasn't quite a smile. "A handyman," he said. "Interesting choice." Nora stood up. She picked up the document folder. She tore it straight down the center slowly, the way you tear something you have fully decided to tear. She set the 2 halves on the table. She pointed at the front door. "Get out of my house." Philip held still for 1 count. Then he picked up his case, walked past Fletcher without looking at him, and let himself out. The door closed with a quiet click. The room was very still. Nora was still standing. Her hands were on the edge of the table, the knuckle bones pale. She was not crying. There was a fine tremor in her arms that she was trying to not let become visible. Fletcher stayed where he was. "Knox sent everything to the Halifax detachment 3 hours ago," he said. "He won't be able to run this on anyone else." Nora nodded. She did not turn around. After a moment she said, "How long did you know?" "I suspected Wednesday. I was certain Friday afternoon." "You didn't tell me." "I needed something you couldn't dismiss, as me protecting my own interest." She laughed once, short and tired, and not without warmth. She did not stay at the table. She walked through the sitting room doorway and into the front room where the fireplace was still waiting, on its final tile work, the new mantel propped against the brick. She sat down on the floor in front of it, with her knees drawn up. Fletcher came in and sat on the floor too, an arm's length away. Neither of them spoke for a while. The house made its quiet old house sounds around them. Outside, someone was walking a dog along the street. A car moved slowly up the hill. The lamp in the dining room threw a square of warm light across the threshold, but didn't reach them where they sat. Nora spoke first. "At the antique shop," she said. "When you said it, I was happy for a second. Then you laughed, and I thought I'd made a fool of myself. I wasn't laughing because it was funny." Fletcher's voice was low and careful. "I was laughing because it wasn't, and I didn't know what to do about that." The silence after that felt different from the silences before it. "Philip was right about one thing," she said. "I chose the most difficult house on the most impractical street." She paused. "I was tired of being sensible. I know that feeling." She looked at him briefly, then back at the fireplace. He let out a slow breath. "Nora, Judith gave me something last night." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the photograph, which he had been carrying since the previous evening. He set it on the floor between them. She picked it up with both hands. She tilted it once toward the window so the streetlight could reach the faces, then held it level. She was quiet for a long time. "That's my mother," she said finally. "And I don't know the other woman." He told her. The Dalhousie cohort, the thesis partnership, the plan for the coastal forest project, his grandfather's refusal, his mother's death, Vivian carrying the work forward alone. He did not mention the codicil. He did not mention what his father's letter had named. Not tonight. That was a different conversation for a different time. "Loretta said it isn't destiny," he finished. "Just a thread. I think she's right." Nora held the photograph between her palms and did not set it down. She looked at the two young women in their canvas shirts, laughing at something outside the frame, not yet knowing anything of what was coming. "My mother never talked about her years at Dalhousie," she said. "I didn't know she had planned any of this. She didn't want it to land on you as an obligation." A small sound came from the direction of the staircase. A bare foot on the old runner, careful and deliberate. Wren appeared at the foot of the stairs in her fleece pajamas, a half-finished drawing in one hand, her hair flattened from where she had been sleeping on it. Fletcher had been working late on the dining room trim that afternoon, and she had fallen asleep on the folded moving blanket in the spare room, the way she sometimes did on long workdays. Crouched, she came across the floor without hurrying and sat down on Nora's other side, tucked her drawing into her lap, and leaned her temple against Nora's arm, as though she had been doing this for years. Nora looked down at the small weight against her shoulder. She did not move. After a long moment she smiled, and it was the first time all evening that her face had fully settled. Nobody said anything for a while. 2 weeks went by. Philip Strath was arrested at a Halifax airport hotel on a Tuesday morning, charged under the criminal code with 3 counts of fraud over $5,000. The RCMP Commercial Crime Unit issued a brief statement. Knox sent Fletcher a text that said only, "Done." The Heritage newsletter posted a correction. It was brief and was not written by the same person who had written the original piece. The editor, when pressed, acknowledged that the newsletter had received a small number of unsolicited submissions over the past year from a contributor who had not disclosed a financial relationship with a private investor. The contributor's name was removed from the masthead. Without further comment, Fletcher kept working on the Montague Street house. He laid the final tile on the fireplace surround. He set the mantel true. He refinished the dormer window and rehung it on new hardware so that it opened and closed in silence for the first time in 30 years. Nora stopped scheduling meetings past 4 o'clock. On the first Thursday, she came home at noon with 2 coffees and a paper bag from the bakery on Lincoln Street. They sat on the back porch steps and talked about the upstairs landing floor and the Mahone Bay project, and nothing in particular, and the conversation went where it went and stopped where it stopped without either of them trying to direct it. On the second Thursday, she brought 2 butter tarts. 3 nights after the arrest, Nora called Fletcher at 8:30 with a question about whether the reclaimed heartwood pine she was considering for the upstairs hallway would be stable in the coastal humidity. He told her that it would be, and that he had a length of it in the workshop she might want to look at. They did not stay on the phone long. It was the first call, she had ever made to him that was not about a specific problem. After they hung up, Fletcher stood in his kitchen for a minute, with his hand still on the phone, before he set it down. On a Friday in the second week, Nora came back early and found Fletcher on the landing. Rehang the old brass light fixture that had been her mother's, which Judith had kept for 7 years and given to Nora 2 months back without knowing quite where to put it. Fletcher had found it on the shelf in the back bedroom and asked that morning whether she wanted it placed. She had said yes without asking how he had known it was there. She stood in the hallway below and watched him work the wiring through the plaster, and she had the very particular feeling of being inside a house that knew her. Wren started calling her Nora after a few days, having dropped the miss without ceremony or announcement. One afternoon, Nora brought Wren a flat rectangular parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a proper beginner's woodcarving set, a Swiss-made kit with safe shallow tools sized for small hands. Wren held the smallest gouge up and examined the bevel. "Daddy," she said, "can Nora teach me?" Fletcher was smiling. "Nora doesn't carve, Wren." Nora was already pulling a stool up to the workbench in the converted back room. "I can learn," she said. He stood in the doorway and watched the two of them lean over a piece of soft basswood, Nora's hand guiding Wren's along the grain, showing her to push cleanly and not to fight the wood. The first pass made a thin, pale curl. Wren made a small, satisfied sound. Fletch, and thought of Claire with a quiet that did not hurt. "You would like her," he said, inside the stillness of his own chest. He did not need an answer back. Something that had been uncertain for weeks settled into something that was not. He picked up a piece of wood from the shelf and pulled up his own stool. The house on Montague Street was finished on a Saturday in November. The floors held their finish, in the particular way old floors do when the wood is right and the work is honest. The fireplace tile was set true. The dormer opened without a sound. The front door hung plumb. The light through the high windows lay across the pine in long, slow panels, the way northern November light does when it comes in low and clean. Fletcher arrived at 8. Nora was in the kitchen with the French press and the kettle already clicked off. Her hair was still damp. The kitchen smelled like coffee and old wood and the faint salt air that came in from the harbor on still mornings. On the open shelf above the stove stood a small wooden frame he had built the night before in the workshop from a scrap of tiger, maple, close-grained and pale gold. He had scanned the photograph, printed it on the heavier mat stock he kept for his own records, and made the frame from what was at hand. 2 young women in canvas work shirts outside a stone building, arms around each other, laughing at something that happened outside the frame. "This belongs here," he said. She took it carefully. She held it for a long time. She turned it once toward the window so the morning light reached the faces, then turned it back. She set it on the shelf beside the coffee things and stood looking at it. "Nora," her voice was quiet and steady. "At Cooper's in the shop, what I said, I had been thinking it for a long time. I just didn't know I was thinking it until it came out." "I know." He did not move toward her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not say anything that would put more weight on the moment than it could carry. He walked to the front door instead. He turned the brass knob he had fitted on Tuesday. He opened the door. The November morning came into the house. Wren was sitting on the top porch step in her good wool coat, a small flat box in her lap. She looked up when the door opened. She looked down at the box, then back at them. She lifted the lid. Inside, on a square of blue cloth, were 2 small carved birds. She had finished them in the workshop the evening before, working at the bench beside her father while he built the frame. One was painted the soft gray-green of the harbor in October. The other was painted the color of the maple scrap he had used for the frame, pale and warm gold. "One for Daddy," Wren said, "and one for Nora." She picked up the gray-green bird and pressed it into Fletcher's palm. She picked up the gold bird and folded Nora's fingers around it, slowly and carefully, the way you close a child's hand around something that matters. Keep it, she said. Nora could not speak. She looked down at the small carved thing in her hand, then at the child who had made it, then at the harbor at the bottom of the hill, glittering in the cold morning light. Fletcher put his hand on Wren's shoulder. After a moment, his other hand came to rest on Nora's back. Not a gesture, just a warmth, just the steady weight of a palm. Dig. The joke had become the truth. Not by announcement, not by declaration, but the way most true things become themselves. Slowly, through small ordinary days, until one morning the word felt less like something borrowed, and more like something that had always belonged to them. I keep thinking about the moment Fletcher set those 3 pieces of paper on Nora's dining table, one after the other, without a word of explanation until they were all down. He didn't rush in. He didn't announce himself. He just showed up with the truth, quietly. After weeks of doing the work that nobody asked him to do, and nobody saw him doing. That's the part that stays with me. Crouched. I think we have this idea that good people get rewarded quickly, that honesty is noticed right away, that doing the right thing pays off in the same week you do it. But that's not how I've seen it work, not really. Fletcher spent weeks carrying something he didn't have to carry. He looked into Philip's background when he had no obligation to, drove out to meet Sandra, called Knox, waited until he had something solid enough that Nora couldn't dismiss it as self-interest. He did all of that without telling her, without credit. And the reason he could do it that way was because he had built something in himself. Over a long time that didn't need the credit to function. That's what I think of when I think about character. Not the grand gesture, the habit. The quiet daily choice to be the kind of person who does the thing even when no one is watching and no one will know. And then there's the other side of it. The intelligence piece, and I don't mean book smarts. I mean the kind of clear-headedness that lets you look at something beautiful and still ask the right questions. Nora was drawn to that Chester property. The photographs were genuinely lovely. Philip was genuinely convincing, and she almost signed. What stopped her wasn't suspicion. It was the fact that somewhere underneath the appeal of the thing, she had already made a decision to trust Fletcher's instinct over her own impatience. That took a certain kind of honest self-knowledge. Knowing when your judgment might be compromised, knowing when to wait. Most of us find that hard. I find it hard. The pull to decide, to move, to stop sitting with uncertainty is enormous. Nora sat with it 2 days. Then she said, okay. And the perseverance part, I think that's Wren. A 6-year-old who carved 2 birds and pressed one into each adult's hand with complete seriousness. She had been showing up to that house for months, drawing in her yellow notebook, watching, learning. She finished those birds in one evening, working beside her father, and she knew exactly who they were for and what she wanted to say. She said it without words. That kind of steadiness in a child doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a father who modeled it, every day, without making a speech about it. I think that's the whole story, really. 3 people who kept showing up, kept doing the small, honest thing, kept choosing the harder and quieter path, and eventually found themselves in a house that felt like it had been waiting for them. The joke became the truth. Not because anyone forced it, because they were the kind of people it could become true for.